Imagine walking through the golden halls of ancient Egypt, where the pharaohs ruled as living gods for over 3,000 years. In these magnificent palaces lined with hieroglyphs and adorned with precious metals, a complex and often misunderstood truth unfolds about one of history's most controversial royal practices. While popular mythology suggests that Egyptian royal families regularly and systematically married their own children and siblings, the reality was far more nuanced, selective, and strategically implemented than many people believe today. If you're new here, subscribe now for more stories that reveal history's hidden truths, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. The story begins with the fundamental religious foundation that shaped all of Egyptian civilization. The pharaohs were not considered ordinary mortals who simply held political power, but rather the earthly embodiment of Horus, the falcon-headed god, and direct descendants of Ra, the sun god himself. This wasn't merely political propaganda or royal pretension, it was the cornerstone belief that held Egyptian society together for millennia. The royal blood flowing through their veins was considered divine essence, a supernatural force that granted them extraordinary powers to control the annual Nile floods, ensure bountiful harvests, protect Egypt from foreign enemies, and maintain cosmic order known as Ma'at. To the ancient Egyptians, the pharaoh's divine connection was literally what kept their world functioning properly. This religious foundation provided the theological justification for keeping the royal bloodline pure, but the actual practice of incestuous marriage was implemented selectively and strategically, rather than as a rigid, unbreakable rule applied to every generation. The concept was that mixing royal blood with common blood would dilute the divine essence and potentially weaken the pharaoh's supernatural abilities, thereby endangering the entire kingdom. However, this didn't mean that every pharaoh married a sibling, or that such marriages were the only acceptable option for royal unions. One significant source of confusion about Egyptian royal marriages comes from the ancient Egyptian language itself. Egyptian men, including pharaohs, often called their wives sent, which literally means sister. This linguistic custom has led to centuries of misunderstandings about the true nature of many royal relationships documented in ancient texts and inscriptions. When hieroglyphic records refer to a pharaoh's sister wife, it doesn't necessarily mean they were biological siblings. This was sometimes simply a term of endearment, a way to emphasize the closeness and intimacy of the marital bond, or even a ceremonial title. This linguistic confusion has significantly contributed to the exaggerated modern perception of how frequently incestuous marriages actually occurred throughout Egyptian history. The most thoroughly documented and genuinely extreme example of systematic royal incest comes from the Ptolemaic dynasty, which ruled Egypt from 305 BCE to 30 BCE. These Greek rulers, descended from Alexander the Great's general Ptolemy I, adopted and then intensified certain Egyptian practices of royal intermarriage to an unprecedented degree. Unlike their Egyptian predecessors, the Ptolemies made sibling marriage a consistent dynastic policy, systematically marrying brothers to sisters for nearly 3 centuries. This created a family tree that was genuinely tangled by repeated intermarriage across multiple generations, with some individuals appearing in multiple positions within the same family lineage. Cleopatra VII, the famous last pharaoh of Egypt and one of history's most celebrated rulers, was indeed the product of this extensive Ptolemaic inbreeding. Her family tree showed such repeated intermarriage that she had significantly fewer distinct ancestors than would be genetically normal. However, despite this extreme genetic bottleneck, Cleopatra herself was clearly intelligent, politically astute, and capable of governing effectively. She spoke multiple languages, was well educated in philosophy and mathematics, and successfully navigated the complex political landscape of the late Roman Republic. Contrary to popular claims about widespread genetic deformities and catastrophic health problems, there is actually little convincing archaeological or historical evidence of significant infertility, infant mortality, or genetic defects that can be directly attributed to the Ptolemaic inbreeding practices. While some genetic issues may have occurred, the Ptolemaic rulers managed to maintain their dynasty for 3 centuries and produced numerous capable leaders who effectively governed Egypt through changing times, foreign pressures, and internal challenges. This suggests that the genetic consequences, while present, were not as devastating as often portrayed in popular culture. The most concrete and well-documented example of royal incest from earlier Egyptian history involves the famous boy pharaoh Tutankhamun, who ruled during the 18th dynasty. Modern genetic analysis has confirmed that Tutankhamun married his half-sister Ankhesenamun and was himself the child of an incestuous union between his father Akhenaten and an unnamed close relative, possibly a sister. CT scans and DNA analysis of royal mummies have revealed some evidence of genetic issues in certain royal lines, including bone deformities and other health problems, but these cases appear to be exceptions rather than the systematic rule that popular mythology suggests. The practice of royal incest served multiple practical purposes beyond its religious justification. Royal women in ancient Egypt held remarkably significant inheritance rights compared to women in other ancient civilizations, and could rule in their own right as pharaohs. This made family marriages politically strategic for consolidating power, preventing the royal bloodline from being diluted through external marriage alliances, and ensuring that succession remained clear and undisputed. By keeping marriages within the royal family, pharaohs could guarantee that royal authority wouldn't be dispersed among competing noble families or foreign princes who might use marriage connections to claim legitimacy. These marriages also served as a form of political insurance. In a world where royal legitimacy was constantly challenged by internal rivals and foreign enemies, keeping power concentrated within a single family line provided stability and reduced the number of potential claimants to the throne. When royal women married outside the immediate family, their children might develop competing claims to rule, potentially leading to civil wars and dynastic instability. It's crucial to understand that incestuous marriage was absolutely not practiced by common people in ancient Egypt. This was specifically and exclusively a royal prerogative, justified by the unique divine status of the pharaoh and the supposed need to preserve the sacred bloodline. The general Egyptian population followed completely different marriage customs and would have found such practices as unusual, disturbing, and inappropriate as people do today. The royal family lived by fundamentally different rules, precisely because they were considered to be fundamentally different from ordinary humans. They were living gods who existed in a separate category of being entirely. Archaeological evidence from non-royal burials and settlement sites shows that common Egyptians practiced exogamy, marrying outside their immediate family, and followed marriage patterns similar to other ancient civilizations. The social and religious taboos against incest that exist in most human societies were present among ordinary Egyptians, making the royal practice even more distinctive and highlighting its connection to the pharaoh's divine status. The gradual decline of these practices came not necessarily from recognition of genetic problems or moral objections, but from changing political circumstances, increased foreign influences, and the gradual erosion of traditional Egyptian religious beliefs. As Egypt came under increasing pressure from other Mediterranean powers, experienced foreign invasions, and eventually fell under Greek and then Roman domination, the strict religious justifications for royal incest became less relevant and harder to maintain. The Persian conquest of Egypt in 525 BCE marked the beginning of the end for traditional Egyptian royal practices. While the Ptolemies later revived and intensified sibling marriage, they did so as Greek rulers trying to legitimize their control over Egypt rather than as continuation of ancient Egyptian tradition. The Romans, who finally conquered Egypt in 30 BCE, brought completely different concepts of leadership and legitimacy that didn't require divine blood, special bloodlines, or family intermarriage. When the Romans established direct control over Egypt with Cleopatra VII's death, they implemented new systems of governance based on military prowess, administrative skill, loyalty to Rome, and appointment by the emperor rather than genetic purity or divine inheritance. This marked a fundamental shift in how political power was understood, legitimized, and transferred, effectively ending one of the most unique and controversial aspects of ancient Egyptian royal culture. The story of Egyptian royal incest ultimately serves as a fascinating window into how religious beliefs, political necessity, and cultural practices could create unusual marriage customs that differed dramatically from normal social norms. While the practice was real and did occur among certain royal families, particularly the Ptolemies, and in specific documented cases like Tutankhamun, was neither as widespread, systematic, nor genetically devastating as popular mythology and sensationalized accounts suggest. This ancient practice represents a unique solution to the complex challenges of maintaining divine authority, political stability, and dynastic continuity in one of history's longest-lasting civilizations. It demonstrates how even the most unusual and seemingly problematic practices can serve practical purposes within their specific cultural, religious, and political contexts. The Egyptian royal marriage system, for all its controversies and complications, helped maintain political stability and religious legitimacy for a civilization that endured for over 3 millennia. The complete story reveals that while Egyptian pharaohs did sometimes marry within their families, this practice was far more selective, strategic, and contextual than popular culture suggests. It was a carefully calculated political and religious tool used by divine rulers who believed they were preserving the supernatural forces that protected one of humanity's greatest civilizations. Understanding this practice requires appreciating both its genuine historical reality and the complex web of beliefs, necessities, and circumstances that made it seem not only acceptable, but essential to the people who practiced it.